Next, we have on with us Fatima Khan. She covers politics, communalism, and social justice for the Quint. She has reported extensively on elections, riots, and gender crimes from multiple states. She specializes in rigorous ground reports, deep dives, and interviews with top leaders. Before joining the Quint, she worked at the print. I'd like to invite Fatima.
Hello, hi everyone, good morning. I landed here late last night, and the breath of fresh air from Delhi was already such a respite, and seeing all your faces has only made it better. Thank you so much for coming. So, I've been asked to speak on issues that plague Muslim women today. And while preparing for this, I realized that Muslim women are one of those subjects that are perpetually being discussed and constantly under the radar, and yet so understudied at the same time. And I realized part of the reason is the gaze with which we look at Muslim women, how we analyze them, how we study them, and also how we report on them, in fact. I'd even say that much of the blame on how Muslim women are represented and misrepresented, in fact, lies on the shoulder of people in my fraternity, the Indian media. Of course, this goes without saying that the Indian media's role in demonizing the average Muslim cannot be overstated. And this is, of course, something that well predates 2014. Which is why today, if we see an anchor speak so much so as respectfully to a Muslim panelist, we are overwhelmed with such a feeling of gratitude, that, okay, thodi tamiz se baat kar li, because we're just so not used to it, which just shows how horrible the state of affairs are. But then I started thinking, growing up as a Muslim girl, what are the kind of issues that I would see being talked about vis-a-vis Muslim women in Indian media? And it would inevitably be Muslim women being given the triple talaq, Muslim women being harassed by their own fathers or husbands, Muslim women not being allowed to study, Muslim women being forced to wear some things, so on and so forth. Um, and this isn't to say that none of those stories were not true. This isn't to say that those stories were a lie. In fact, those stories would still not be a lie. So, what was the problem? The problem was that growing up as a Muslim girl, I'd seen no one talking about the trauma that I was undergoing. And the source of this said trauma weren't the men in my family, they weren't my parents. In fact, it wasn't my community at all. In fact, it was a few boys, 2 grades above me in a school in Gurgaon, who would feel it's okay to catcall me, slut shame me, and call me a terrorist in the same breath. Of course, years later, I'd realized only in hindsight that this wasn't an experience that was unique to me. It wasn't a me problem. It was something that many young Muslim girls growing up in tier 1 or tier 2 cities in relatively quote unquote urban settings had to undergo. And that's when I realized that there is intuitively, inherently a problem in how Muslim women are reported and studied and understood. Uh, I would later also develop an understanding that what we were experiencing as young Muslim girls and teenagers was an example of patriarchy, yes, but a specific kind of patriarchy, a kind of patriarchy that my female friends from the Hindu community never had to undergo. None of this is to say that just because we were facing harassment and Islamophobia at the hands of Hindu boys, does it mean that there weren't Muslim women who were being subjected to triple talaq or who weren't facing harassment at the hands of the men in their own community? For every story of Muslim women I'd see growing up would be stories of Muslim women being victims. Yes, but victims of who? Victims of Muslim men. And that's when I realized that every assumption about a Muslim woman is also an assumption about a Muslim man. So when you say that a Muslim woman is being forced to wear the hijab, you're also effectively saying that it is the Muslim men who are forcing her to wear the hijab. When you're saying that Muslim women are voiceless, you're effectively saying that it's the Muslim men who have rendered them agencyless and caged them. When you're saying that Muslim women aren't allowed to study or educate themselves, you're saying that it's the Muslim men who have snatched that right from them. So the demonization works in a two-pronged fashion. In the last 2 months, I have been working on a documentary on the callous hijab ban by the Karnataka government. For this documentary, I have met several young Muslim hijabi girls in Karnataka who have been affected deeply and severely by this ban. Of course, they talked to me about the absolute horrors of institutionalized Islamophobia, which is, of course, state sanctioned, but also about the sheer liberal apathy that they have had to face and undergo. Uh, to the point where they've talked to me about the articles they have read where liberals, quote unquote, have found it okay to sit down and dissect a woman's choice of clothing in public discourse, something that wouldn't be acceptable and in fact would raise too many eyebrows if it were to done with a non-hijabi woman's choice of clothing in the 21st century. So much so that some people have even gone to the extent of calling them pawns, not realizing just how patronizing and condescending that is as a concept. So when I met Alia and Almas and several other young hijabi girls who were also petitioners in the case against the hijab ban, I found them that, of course, for them, this is a fight for justice. Uh, but I also found them to be incredibly articulate about their struggles internally, which is to say that it's not like they were unaware of the complications of the concept of choice or devoid of any understanding of feminist principles or practices, or that these feminist arguments hadn't impressed any kind of impact on them. That wasn't the case. Uh, they were thinking, feeling, complex human beings, and it's sad that I even have to spell it out in so many words today. In fact, one of the lead petitioners even went to the extent of saying that for her, this is, of course, a fight for equality, and this is, of course, a Muslim fight, but this is also a feminist fight. And I think that at the crux is the point that I'm trying to make. It is that sometimes there is this deliberate and often subconscious relegation of Muslim women, not as thinking beings who actively desire and perform, but merely subjects to whom things happen. I'm sure, as many of you would know, in the last year, Muslim women have been auctioned online multiple times, most notably in what was termed as Sulli deals and later as bully buy. Many reacted with outrage, shock, and disgust. To me, finding my own name in both those lists was, of course, horrifying, but it was also emblematic of a culture of seeing Muslim women as property to lay your claim on in order to establish a dominance over the Muslim community. It also exemplifies just how rattling it is for some to see Muslim women occupy the public space and also speak up. A few months ago, I was scrolling on Twitter when someone had shared a Twitter Spaces recording that they'd stumbled upon. In the recording, young Hindu men and women, none of whom were anonymous, by the way, are discussing at length the fantasy of raping a Muslim woman. One of the men declares how raping a Muslim woman is actually one of the highest ranking methods of furthering the project of Hindutva, even more than, quote unquote, breaking 1,000 Babris. Weeks later, the movie The Kashmir Files was released, and the questionable politics of the movie aside, many also wrote about their experience of going and watching the movie in a movie theater. Videos of many men in the audience, some official BJP workers, many just rabid Hindutvawadis, standing up after the movie and exhorting others to get impressed by the movie and influenced by the movie and take the cause further, went viral. In one such video, there is a man who's imploring the others in the audience to marry Muslim women quickly in order to annihilate and eventually finish off the Muslim men and the Muslim community as a whole. a call for genocide framed as casual post-movie soiree. Yet again, a few weeks later, in Uttar Pradesh's Sitapur, a Mahant or self-styled godman stood in front of a masjid in the presence of police personnel and warned Muslim men that if they were to ever harass any Hindu woman, he will go on and kidnap 1,000 Muslim women and rape them. He was subsequently arrested only to be let out on bail a few days later. Now, many of these things I realize would sound too graphic and gory to many of you in the audience, but this is the unfortunate and honest reality of being a Muslim woman in India today. This reality coexists with the reality of those Muslim women who may have been abandoned by their husbands, those who may not be allowed to wear the clothes that they want, those who may be fighting for emancipation within the four walls of their own home. And so the fight for equality and justice for the Indian Muslim woman also needs to be twofold. And this will require, and I would really like to impress upon this, and if, I'm sure there are many Muslim men in the audience, this will require you, the Muslim men, to step up, to not shy away from conversations about sexism and patriarchy in your own household, to speak up when their otherwise perpetually woke posturing Muslim comrades make casually sexist remarks. This will require the Muslim men to ask themselves why they can be cheerleaders for the Muslim women who question the government but are so quick to abuse the same Muslim women when they flag stories of gender discrimination or caste discrimination within the community. The Muslim men who are okay so long as the said Muslim woman fits their neat little compartment of the unapologetic Muslim, but she starts bothering them when she starts demanding an apology and accountability from them for failing to speak up for her rights. The Muslim men who will harp on and on about allyship and the failure of non-Muslim liberals to be half-decent allies, a criticism, just for the record, I fully agree with, but forget that they fail to be allies in much of the Muslim woman's struggle for her own emancipation and empowerment within her own home. I'm one of those people who believe that every crime is political. When you're marginalized on not one but multiple counts, this politicization and the politics of your marginalization only increases. And so they require us to think about deeply, and these political crimes also require, by extension, political solutions. Not in the partisan sense of the word, but the fight shoulder to shoulder kind. And I really hope that at the end of this 3-day conference, all of us come out a little more self-reflective. I see people pointing fingers at others all the time. I do that too. But I think it would be a good lesson to just sit back and think about how just or equal or egalitarian we are within our own lives, with the people we hang out with the people we treat and behave with when there aren't any cameras around us, when there isn't the gaze of social media around us. Are we really, really equal and just and fair then or not? Thank you so much.